Hello, everyone. This is Margaret Manning with 60 and Me. This is the place where women over 60 come to be inspired. And today we're going to speak with someone who's going to help us unravel one of the most fascinating and mysterious parts of the human body, the brain. Dr. Indre Viskontas is a neuroscientist. She is working to research memory, reasoning, and self-identity. And she's going to help us to understand how we can keep our brains healthy after 60. So, Dr. Viskontas, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. First of all, before we get started, can you tell people what a neuroscientist actually does, what you do?
Sure. So a neuroscientist is someone who usually has a PhD in a field of neuroscience. So our job is to really figure out how the physical structure of the brain supports the mind. So the thinking, memory, reasoning, emotions, perception, etc. And we get interested in a particular topic. So my subfield really is in memory and in how our brains change when either something negative happens to us, like a disease or an injury, or we train our brains to get better at something like learning a musical instrument, or simply as a function of aging. And a neuroscientist really wants to understand the brain and also how understanding the brain can help us function better in the world.
So, when you get to be 60 years old, our community has 25,000 women over 60, and a lot of us are thinking about the things that change as we get older. And everyone starts to think that their brain is suddenly going to lose all capability or lose our memory, not be so creative. And I know that there are specific things that we can do to keep our brains healthy and strong. So I've read quite a bit to say that the main thing we should be thinking about is exercise, about keeping our bodies active. And I wanted to get your feedback on that as to whether you think that is a priority and an important element, and what kind of exercise you would recommend.
Sure. So you're absolutely right that a lot of studies have shown that exercise is one of the best predictors of a healthy brain and healthy function later on in life. Even in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, it turns out that when people exercise, their symptoms are better than if they don't exercise. Or they're less severe and they sort of stave off some of the negative aspects of the disease. Now, it's not a cure, obviously, and there are still things that need to be treated with medicine and so on. But the reason that exercise is so important in terms of brain function is because our brains are the most costly organ in our bodies in terms of fuel and metabolic activity. So, for example, as we've evolved, it turns out that our brain uses so much energy that it's almost a marvel that we've continued to evolve with such big brains. And it's a testament to the fact that our brains are so important that we have continued to make all these sacrifices to fuel this huge organ in our head. Well, why is that? It's because the way that our brain functions, it's through connections between brain cells. So there are 100 billion neurons in your brain. And the way that your brain works is by sending messages all across the brain. And to send those messages, the cells use electrochemical reactions. And these reactions require oxygen and nutrients in the blood. So we need to fuel our brains in order to do all of this activity, all this neural firing. It's actually why when you're feeling a little tired or you haven't eaten in a while, that your brain actually doesn't function as well as it could. And in fact, that sometimes people have shown these studies that if you give kids a sweet candy before they're supposed to take the test, they actually do better on the test. The brain uses the glucose in order to function. So when we think about the brain as being this really energy costly organ in our bodies, it makes sense that if our bodies can't pump up enough oxygen and nutrients into the brain, that the brain's not going to function at its optimum level. So this is why, as we get older and some of the cardiovascular sort of abilities of our body to get those nutrients to our brain tend to decline, it's even more important to keep the exercise up so that you can continue to fuel your brain. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that your brain is part of your body, and if your body starts to deteriorate, then your brain's not going to be able to function as well as it could either.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you can continue to keep up that higher level of functioning by exercising, by keeping your heart pumping, by keeping your lungs doing their thing,
Mm-hmm.
then your brain function can perform as it needs to.
So are there any kind of exercises that are particularly good for health, for brain health? I mean, aerobics, or is walking okay?
Sure. I mean, walking is great. Any exercise is great. And I think that walking is something that is probably the easiest for
Mm-hmm.
most of us to do. Although what happens as you get older, as probably a lot of your readers or listeners or audience knows, is that sometimes your bones start to break down, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You get your hips start to hurt, and now it's hard to take those long walks. So it's just as important to do those weight-bearing exercises that will keep your bones strong and keep your bones from deteriorating, so that you can continue to do the aerobic exercises that are going to keep your brain functioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to really try to stay as healthy as possible, because if you lose the function of a leg, it's going to be a lot harder for you to do any exercise. So, I would say that any exercise is great, but also that it should be done every day. So a lot of people say, well, I'm going to exercise 3 times a week. And that's great, but it's better if you can exercise for a shorter period of time every day.
Right.
Because for one thing, it gets into your habits. And now, it's part of your day, and it's no longer a special thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's important is because often when we get busy, the grandkids come over, it's easy
Mm-hmm.
to put that special thing to the next day,
Yeah.
right? Well, I'm not
Yeah.
going to exercise today
Yeah.
because I'm busy. I'm having, tea with my friends or whatever. And so I'm not going to exercise today. I'll exercise tomorrow. But if you exercise every day, then that's not an issue. You just start your day with the exercise,
It's
or
a
you end your
routine.
day with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just part of, just like you don't skip meals necessarily. Once in a while, sure, you skip a meal, but most of the time you don't. And that exercise should be the same way. So that it's just as important for you to get that exercise as it is for you to eat or do any other thing that you do every day.
That is such great advice, and that's actually one of the things we talk about in lots of different things in the community, is that you just have to take action. That is, take one small step, but do it consistently, do it regularly, and build it into as you said, your way of life. So easier said than done, though. But in terms
of course,
in terms of your physical health, I mean, obviously exercise is very important. But what about the food that you eat? I know that nutrition is important as well. What kinds of foods would you suggest? I mean, there's all this talk about blueberries and salmon being brain food, and you should go out and eat, as much of them as you can. But I'm gathering that may be a trend rather than reality.
Yeah, so I think it is important to be very skeptical of any food trends you see on the internet or on television, because it's really hard to do a controlled study of some kind of nutritional supplement in a group of people. It's hard to get compliance. It's also part of the time it's not ethical.
Mm-hmm.
So you really want to take it with a grain of salt what you see on the internet or you read about in the newspaper or on television. But there are certain foods that seem to have, that there's a theory behind why they might be good for brain function, and these are generally foods that have either omega-3 in them, like the salmon that you talked about. Or that have antioxidants in them. So these are the very bright fruits and vegetables like blueberries that have a high concentration, high saturation of color. They tend to have a higher antioxidant content in them. And things like green tea, for example, which also is rich in antioxidants, but so is coffee, and so is black tea. So there's some suggestion, there's a theory out there that the way that these antioxidants work is through allowing your body to process iron more efficiently. And these kind of iron deficiencies have been linked to certain neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. Now, they are not the cause of those diseases, but there seems to be some linkage. So there isn't a food that is going to stave off Alzheimer's disease. But like exercise or like anything else we do in our lives, making sure that you make the right choices, sort of healthy choices, is going to be better than not making those choices. And of course, there's great evidence to show that eating food in moderation is probably your best bet, right?
So it's your calorie range.
Yeah, Michael Pollan's school of eat everything, not too much, mostly fruits and vegetables. That's if you need a quick sort of what should I eat, that's a great way of thinking about it. Mostly fruits and vegetables, not a lot, but a little bit of everything. And I think the idea is that you're really going to capture as many nutrients as you can from a wide variety of foods. And we are omnivores, so you're not just focusing on one particular food, but at the same time, yeah, eating foods that are have a rich, vibrant color suggests that they have a lot of vitamins, antioxidants. That's Mother Nature's way of showing you this is good to eat. So I think that.
No, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I was thinking as you were talking about food, I was getting hungry. But no, I was just thinking, that a lot of people do reach for food because it's a comfort thing and it's something that helps them to deal with stress or to deal with just to some discomfort, something in their lives. So I know that's something else that we need to look at for brain health is the way that we manage stress. And what would your view be on things like meditation and other techniques as a way of strengthening the brain?
So first, let's talk about why stress on the brain is harmful. In particular, it's harmful to your memory. And this is because when you're stressed, especially sort of long-term, low-grade stress, your brain gets bathed in a hormone called cortisol. And this is damaging to your brain because it sort of shuts down the way your memory functions to a certain extent. So, the more stressed you are over time, over your life, the more damage you have to the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that really is responsible for laying down new long-term memories. So it's that part of your brain that, let's say you're trying to remember what you did last weekend with your friends, the hippocampus really be driving your ability to remember that event. So if you're stressed, it actually impedes this function. And over time, you can see these memory effects of long-term low-grade stress. So how do we stave off this stress? Well, one way, of course, is to have a lifestyle in which we're not stressed. But another way, too, is to sort of clear your mind of the things that are stressing you out. So it turns out that when we are left to our own devices, so we're just at rest, we're not watching TV or we're not, doing anything, maybe we're driving or we're sort of at rest. Most of us tend to ruminate about our lives. We think about what we just did. We think about what we need to do in the future. We tend to go through this process of rumination. And this rumination can lead to stress because we might think about, the things that we still need to get done or we haven't done today. And when your brain is always in this constant use and it's never sort of quieted down, it's never sort of reset, then that too can lead to an increase in stress. Now, meditation, as you mentioned, is one of the ways in which we've shown, it has been shown that it can reduce stress in the moment. So people who meditate, by definition, become more calm and more relaxed and less stressed. I mean, that's the whole point of meditation. So by just giving your brain that bit of a break, it does tend to decrease the effects of stress overall. And just now we're starting to see some neuroscience research about the effects of meditation on other aspects of people's lives. And it does seem to be, there does seem to be some evidence that if you meditate sort of regularly and frequently and you do it, that you can help some of the other cognitive functions that you want to get better at. So for example, focusing your attention. And you can think about meditation as sort of training your brain to focus, right? Even if it's focusing on nothing, which is its own special kind of focus. And most of us don't spend any time trying to train our attention. We tend to think of it as something we either have or we don't. I can pay attention to this thing because I'm interested in it, or I'm not interested in that, so I have trouble paying attention to that. Or in general, I'm just not, I'm not very good at paying attention to anything. And especially nowadays with attention deficit disorder being, diagnosed all over the place, everybody seems to have some version of attention deficit disorder because in part, we're so surrounded by things that are distracting, right? Phones and, the internet and everything going on. We're so distractible. So learning how to train your attention is very effective if you want to function better in life. And that's what meditation really is trying to do. It's trying to help you learn to focus your attention.
So that relaxed state is obviously very important for the brain, but what about stimulating the brain? Because I know that, for example, learning a new language or playing games can actually help the brain as well. So what's your thought on that? And I'd really be interested in, especially in if you've got any recommendations, any good places that we could go to play some games and what kind of games work best?
Sure. So, there is a real seminal study that came out, well, maybe a few years ago now, that looked at a group of nuns that sort of lived together for many, many decades. And they looked at these nuns because they had a pretty standard life experience, right? They sort of had, they were living in convent, and they sort of had the same opportunities, the same life experience. And some of these nuns tended to, live very long and really not have any effects of aging in terms of their brain function. And so the psychologists that were studying these nuns were trying to really understand, what was it about the nuns that didn't have, didn't get the sort of cognitive effects of aging as strongly as the nuns that did. And it turns out that one of the big differences was that the nuns that, showed this sort of healthy cognitive aging tended to be more involved in things that seemed to stimulate their brains. So, for example, they were either really interested in reading, or in doing puzzles, or in doing things that sort of engaged their brains. So this initial study sort of set off this whole series of studies into what does it mean to sort of keep your brain healthy. And it turns out that, one of the better indicators of people suffering from Alzheimer's disease and sort of how severe it's going to be is in part how much education they have and how much intellectual rigor they sort of continue to have in their lives. Now, you could argue that there are two reasons for this. One, it could be, well, the education and the sort of intellectual work that they did throughout their lives sort of helped them stave off Alzheimer's disease by being protective. On the other hand, you could argue that, well, they started out with more cognitive resources, right? They started out at a higher level of cognitive functioning, so it takes more disease to get them down to the same level as someone who didn't start out with as much cognitive functioning. Now, the jury's still out about which of these two hypotheses is the correct one. But ultimately now we also know that, it seems to be indicative that if you do continue to exercise your brain, that you do sort of stave off some of the potentially harmful effects of aging. Now, why is that? Probably the best work that I've seen come out of this field is work that shows that just like exercise, your brain sort of needs to sort of stay active in order to be able to be active the next day. So our brains are not like a computer where if I take a hammer and I hit my computer with a hammer, my computer's not going to rewire itself and, regenerate. But my brain might. And under the right circumstances, it will rewire and it will rehabilitate and it will continue to function well. So we call this, brain plasticity, right? The brain actually is an organ that changes and grows even as we get older. It's amazing that we even grow new neurons even throughout, our lives. It used to be thought that, well, you were born with a certain number of neurons and maybe you added a few during the development of your brain. But once you hit your teenage years, that was it. No more new neurons. And we know that's not true.
Right.
In fact, we grow new neurons all the time. What you do with your brain today, because it's this kind of plastic structure, is going to affect what you can do with it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So for most of us, we kind of go through our lives and then in our 40s, 50s, 60s, we tend to plateau in terms of the way that we use our brain. We know we're probably in a steady job. We sort of do the same thing over and over again. We might be challenged here and there, but we don't try to learn something completely new or try to do something completely different. Our society is just not built that way. But it turns out that if you want to be able to do something completely new in your 70s, you need to have been doing that in your 40s, 50s, and 60s to keep your brain active, to keep it, in that state in which it can be plastic and it can take on that new skill. Now, that isn't to say that, if you haven't done this and you're now 65, that there's no hope for you. Certainly not.
No,
Absolutely not. And at any age, I think one of the things that we've seen is that what's important is that you're doing something that is effortful, that feels hard, right? Like if you go to the gym and you exercise, and it's not hard, you're really not building the muscle and getting the benefit from exercise as if you're really working. If you're sweating and the next day your muscles are a little sore, you've actually probably done something that it's been effective. It's the same thing with your brain. If it's easy, if you can just sit in front of your computer and kind of shut off and play some kind of a game, it might be entertaining, but it's not necessarily going to make your brain function better the next day. So there are some companies now that sell these online brain, gaming tools or software, or you can play games online. And the ones that I think are the most reputable are the ones that recognize that training your brain is just like exercising, that you need to avoid plateaus, that the game needs to get harder as you get better at it, and that you also need to do a wide variety of games, because sometimes they'll say, well, play this one, play Tetris, for example, and that'll help your brain function. Well, playing Tetris will help you play Tetris, right? So it's not necessarily going to help you remember the grocery list when you get to the grocery store, or help you drive more carefully. So you need to be able to do the exercises that are specific to what you want to improve. Just like if you went to the gym and you wanted to, get a flat stomach, you need to do ab work. You can't, you can't just, lift weights with your arms, and that's not going to give you a flat stomach. So it's the same thing in terms of your brain training. Let's say, what you want to do is improve memory, the type of memory that you want to improve, because actually there are many different types of memory, right? Memory for riding a bike versus your grocery list are actually subserved by very different parts of the brain. Or, you want to be able to focus your attention, or you want to be able to drive more carefully and see things in the periphery more appropriately. So there are certain exercises that people can do on the computer or elsewhere that can affect these different skills. But what I say in terms of just overall brain function, one of the things that seems to be, or I guess two things I think that are probably particularly effective, although the studies out there, are still inconclusive. One would be to learn a new language. And this is because it involves so many different regions of your brain, and it really requires you to think in a different way, and it's really hard. And I think that kind of effortful, so the variety of brain regions involved can really help you function, and stave off the effects of aging in a way that just doing, say, a simple computer game can't. The other thing that I suggest, too, is learning a musical instrument. And that's my bias.
I was going to ask you.
I'm a musician. But I think the same thing happens in music, because music, like language, relies on many different parts of the brain, and many different skills are involved. And it's usually very different from what the person is used to doing. If you're not a musician and you've never played a musical instrument, try to sit down and learn to play the piano or the cello. And you'll find that it's very hard. But on the other hand, you're learning all these new coordinations, all these new skills. And, in the end, just the trying, the exercising, the learning part is what's going to help you later on. It doesn't matter if you're never going to be a concert pianist, or, ever invite anyone to hear you play the cello. The point is that you're exercising this, desire to build new connections and to sort of keep your brain active.
Yeah, and I think when we chatted before, you were saying about the importance of not staying on plateaus, like not doing something where you stay at the same level all the time, but where you're always going to the next level and pushing yourself harder. So I think that's really
exactly.
That's it. I mean,
so it's just like exercise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if your goal is to stay where you are, then the plateau is just fine, right? You can stay in that. You can do that for as long as you want. But if your goal is to get better, or to stave off something that is going to get worse with time, then you really need to make sure that you're going beyond that plateau. And that's why personal trainers are great in exercises, because they keep you, they keep making the exercises harder as you get better. The same thing needs to be true in terms of your brain function. If it feels easy, it's not as effective.
It's not working. No, it's really interesting, because a lot of women in their 60s have been their whole lives have been establishing routine, and I think that's what makes it really not so much hard, but I think it's just a mindset that you can try something that's completely different and not be affected by the stereotypes that might be holding you back. But the one thing that, as you were talking, I was thinking about when you said sitting by a computer playing games, that I think that another aspect of social connection is really important to brain health. And I actually have been working a little bit on this concept of resilience, and thinking about what makes some people more resilient to challenges than others. And one of the things that came up consistently was this theme of connection, that people need each other to be stronger. Does that apply to brain health as well?
Absolutely. And I think that's actually, it's a really important point. There's some really wonderful studies that show even something as simple as having a plant in a person's hospice room, at the end of life, makes them live longer, because they have something to take care of. They have something that they are sort of, connected to do and that relies on them.
Mm-hmm.
This is why pets are so great for older adults, especially when they're living alone, because it's something that, you need to take care of. You need to get up out of bed and, feed the cat or walk the dog. And the same thing, of course, is in terms of our social interactions. So our brains really evolved in a social atmosphere. And it turns out that the parts of our brain that really differentiates us from other animals is called the neocortex, or the new cortex, or the new brain, sort of the newest, evolutionarily speaking, part of our brains. And we have a greater ratio of this new brain to old brain than virtually any other animal. This is what makes us, think we're so smart. That's why we think we're so smart. We have this neocortex that's has a greater proportion of our brain than in any other animal. So, and this neocortex developed around the same time that humans started living in more and more complex groups, social groups. So there's this hypothesis out there called the social brain hypothesis that suggests that much of the connectivity of our brain, much of the development of this neocortex really came in response to navigating social relationships. And I think this is really interesting, because I think that this means that, our brain function is affected, by social interactions. And this is partly why I think that, being social and doing these kinds of difficult activities in a social setting is probably more helpful for you in terms of staving off the cognitive effects of aging than doing it by yourself. And this is partly why I think that, if you want to learn the guitar, you can go on YouTube and you can watch a bunch of videos of someone teaching you how to play the guitar. But if you hire a guitar teacher and he comes to your house, or you go to his or her house, I think you're going to get much more out of the lessons and out of that interaction in terms of your brain function, because you have that social component. And, there's so many things that we respond to in others that our conscious minds are not necessarily aware of, in terms of body language, in terms of connecting with people. And so, I think that by being in social settings, you do sort of activate those different parts of the brain. And of course, that connection gives you a will to live. It gives you a motivation for going out and exercising and eating right and doing all those other things. And so yeah, I think the social aspect of it is very important. And, I'm delighted with this resurgence or I guess emergence of, websites like yours, where you're really connecting people together, even across vast distances, or things like there's another website called Meetup, which, sort of schedules sort of meetups of people, like-minded people, to get together and to do things that they're interested in. We're really busy these days, and it's hard to find time to just sort of connect with people. But if you can do an activity together, go on a group hike, or, you can mesh brain training exercises with social interaction by joining a bridge club. That's actually really helpful. And I think that way, it's first of all, it's going to make it more likely that you're going to continue to do that thing because you're accountable to somebody else. You've got that Tuesday afternoon meeting, or that Saturday morning hike. So it's going to get you out there. But also, it's more fun. And I think ultimately it's better for your brain.
And I think it also gives you a sense of usefulness and having a purpose. And I don't know whether that has any connection to brain health, but I know it feels better. And maybe that goes back to the stress management and when you feel like you're contributing something. Because even in our community now, we have comments and conversations starting, and people jump in and try to help each other and offer advice and share experiences. It seems like there's this natural inclination to do that. And I don't know whether that's just that we have a kindness in us as people, as women, or that we just are, it's just something that we need and crave. But anyway, this has been fascinating. I don't want to leave anything out, but is there anything that we've missed? Any message that you'd like to give to the community? Anything that you'd like to leave us with?
I think by joining this community, the women that are involved have really made the important first step, which is to find like-minded individuals to get together and to really think about, how they can improve. Because the truth is that the more we learn about the brain, the more we understand how potentially limitless, our skills are. There really seems to be no end to what we can do. And this idea that as you get older, you're going to decline. There's some truth to that, just as there is some truth to the fact that, yes, if you don't continue to consume calcium and do weight-bearing exercises, your bone health is going to suffer. But it doesn't have to be that way. And there are things that we can do to really stave off these effects. And so it's a real tragedy for people who don't know that and who, choose a lifestyle in which they're not giving themselves the optimal chance to sort of have a long and healthy lifetime. So, I think and it's not easy. I mean, it's easy to say, right? It's not easy to do, but I think by being part of a community and being able to share both frustrations and successes is something that's really important. And so, I'm delighted that your website is so successful and that your group is around.
Thank you. So before we go, I do want to ask you about your music, because I know this is really important to you, and that you're an opera singer, that you have a master's degree in music, and that's amazing, just that you were able to do both a PhD in neuroscience and a master's in music. But I'm sure that there's a connection. How would you connect those two dots?
Sure. Well, I see those two sides of my life, scientist and artist, as really being fundamentally about the same thing. In the end, I'm really interested in human behavior and why we do the things that we do. And a scientist's job is to look at human behavior and try to extract general principles, try to figure out what's true for everyone. By conducting studies and thinking deeply and presenting theories and hypotheses. And an artist's job is to really also figure out what is universal, what is common to everyone, but by using their own personal experience to illuminate that. So I see the two as, fundamentally the goals are the same. It's just that the paths to getting there are different. And nowadays, as we are living in a time in which, it's the era of having the same job for 40 years is over. Most people are going to have to change jobs every few years, if not more so than that. And so I think nowadays it's even more important to really figure out what it is that's so, that really drives you and is passionate for you, and then sort of create your own path. And that's what I've tried to do with, these two sides of my personality, is to try to create a new path that makes me uniquely qualified to what I do. And that way you get rid of the competition, because in the end, there's no one else that can do. There are few neuroscientist opera singers out there.
I don't think I know any
cornered.
I don't think I know any neuroscientists or opera singers. I think you have truly shaped a unique character in yourself, and I'm so grateful we got a chance to meet you and hear this, your advice and just your experience. And thank you so much for sharing with us. It's been really great.
You've been very kind. Thank you for having me, Margaret.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.